Hauntings, EVPs and mystical visions. How does our brain translate this? And what is the new house effect? Even though a national daily newspaper reported in July 2015 that 82% of the Britons believe in the supernatural, 86% say they have experienced a supernatural event, and 56% have had some sort of contact from a bereaved loved one. Many are still holding a skeptical view on the scientific research in order to search for a plausible explanation of what these paranormal events really are. I am your host, Maria Anna van Driel, and you are listening to The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. This week I am welcoming back two dedicated and trained by the Association for the Scientific Study of Anomalous Phenomena UKian paranormal investigators Howe and Andy Wilson. Together with their team, PRI-UK, Nick and Andy are gathering evidence and trying to make sense of what still lies beyond the borders of the unexplained, and share the opinion that, despite the widespread belief, some scientific fields lack a broad-minded approach to the paranormal and generally rejects the idea that these unexplained events could occur. I believe these events are not just your mind playing tricks on you. In fact, there might actually be a scientific explanation for things like ghosts, demonic hauntings, and even shadow people. Nick, Andy, welcome back to again to The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. For the second time, I'm really happy to have you here. Last time we spoke about your investigation at the Tilbury site, I believe it is.
That's the one.
Yes, that you let us hear a couple of EVPs. And you started to talk about how our brain is manipulating or can be manipulate our vision and probably even the surroundings, and even, now I'm very cautious, the people next to you, so that you can create well, an electrified mass hysteria.
Yes.
Please tell us more about your investigations, and especially how the brain is translating the sounds around us that we not, well, probably not audible for our ears, but for our brains to pick up.
Yeah. I think one of the, perhaps the starting block, and excuse me to listeners, viewers, if you know this already, but one of the things that really does fascinate me is the Charles Bonnet syndrome. For those that aren't aware of what that is, about 200 years ago, I believe, a Swiss gentleman started having what appeared to be hallucinations. Yeah. And it's become a recognised medical condition amongst people who are unfortunately losing their sight. So much so that our own National Health Service actually produces a little booklet to explain to people. So it's quite common, but by varying degree. And I think, if you don't mind, if we use that as a starting point, because what actually is happening is that people, some people, not everybody that's losing their sight, but some people start having what are hallucinations, and they start seeing figures. Sometimes it is actually just shapes. Random shapes, but do actually see figures, and they believe that there are people standing there. And what's quite interesting is that quite often the people that they're looking at aren't people that they've ever met. They seem to be composite figures, so it's not as though they're looking at, daughters, children, people that they've known throughout their life.
Well, I heard about something like that you see your husband or your child, but you don't recognize them as them.
Well,
but that is the capture delusion.
It doesn't actually have to be anybody physically there.
Okay.
It's not that the mind is sort of manipulating the image that you're perceiving. These things don't actually exist. And it could even, I mean, I think that there's one example where somebody was sitting on a sofa and they started seeing, I think it was like a child's toy, like a little robot or something like that. So there's no dimension to these things. You know, it's not as though they necessarily have to be full-blown figures, you know, in true perspective, but they could be little people, you know, and that's very odd or very strange. But it is very common.
But again, it's the brain. The brain fills in the gaps.
Yeah.
So when you've got missing bits of data, the brain fills in the gaps for you.
Yes.
So that's sometimes when you look around the room and you quickly see something out of the corner of your eye, and you think you've seen something completely different to what's actually there. It's because the brain is doing all the work for you to fill in the gaps. And it's a bit like, you know, when you're on a night time and you look at that pile of clothes on the chair, and it looks like some kind of figure. But when you switch the light on, it's just a pile of clothes. The brain is just trying to figure out what's the best interpretation of that sources. The thing about corner of your eye and seeing shadow figures and things dart is that our brain, basically, we perceive movement. You know, we're predators as primates. We're predators, so our brains evolved to see movement, and the corner of your eye, that your peripheral vision is probably the most sensitive to movement, and that probably protects us from, you know, other predators attacking us. So we have this natural inbuilt mechanism to see movement out of the corner of our eyes, and it's interesting that this tends to be black and white. It tends to be less color. So your brain is perhaps, you know, when people say, oh, the ghost was grey, or it was a black shadow figure, or it was a white lady, these are all kind of perceptions that lack colour, and it could be that, you know, we're just misperceiving our surroundings, and our brains just filling in the blanks for us. So that's one theory about why people see things out of the corner of their eyes.
I mean, I think the common term for misperception in some ways is pareidolia. And again,
yes.
I think most people are sort of familiar with that idea that you can.
Well, I spoke a while ago with Professor Frank T. McAndrew, and he said that we are a species descending from cowards instead of predators. That we see faces like pareidolia, or shapes, human shapes or animal shapes or ghostly shapes in a pile of clothes, because we need to be alert and calculate in danger.
Yes.
And that is better than not calculating in the danger and being eaten than having the fear and there was nothing and surviving.
Yeah.
So this is in contra with what you are saying.
Fight or flight situation, really.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you know, we're evaluating our environment all the time, and I think the thing is that if you think of that in the context of people that are going out ghost hunting, most of them, or that's a bit unfair to perhaps say that, but a lot of people are looking for some sort of thrill, so that they're obviously wanting to have some sort of experience. But the other thing is that they're probably in a state of heightened anxiety as well. There is going to be some element of fear involved, and so therefore their senses are going to be heightened, and interpret things that are happening around them as being the threat, and the threat that they want it to be. So in other words, it's paranormal, it's a ghost, it's a demon, it's a portal opening, and all these sort of things. So I think that's the psychology of it. And when you see people in that situation as well, it's quite interesting to sort of read them as well. It sounds a bit patronizing in some ways to actually.
The brain is a strange thing.
Yeah.
When you go into neuroscience, for instance, and okay, this is gross, but okay, you dismember the brain, and then there is the corpus callosum, I believe, and that is somewhere located by the bridge. Okay, neuroscientific terms, that can produce a kind of, well, let's say a sugary substance, like sugar, like I forgot the Latin word for that. When you get electrified and your neurons going berserk and everything is charged in a certain way in electricity, it could be that this sugary substance is starting to burn in a kind of way, not literally, happily. That this can create the smell of rotten eggs.
Right. Okay.
Or
Yes.
burnt flesh,
Yes.
or
Yes.
sulfur, and now you are smelling demonic presence, or the devil himself.
Yeah, and again, it's not just necessarily the physical things that are happening to you, but your surroundings as well. I think ionization of the atmosphere. I mean, personally, again, I don't have any scientific proof because I haven't investigated, but quite often those ionizers that you put in your room, you know, that generate negative ions to make you feel better. If you actually put your nose very close to them, there's quite a distinctive smell.
Yes.
So if you're in a sort of a high state, perhaps because of ionization of the atmosphere, again, it's lightning, you know, I mean, creates that sulfurous smell. You know, people put two and two together and make the four that they want it to be. They complete that circle. And again, psychology of belief. I mean, it's not just a case of I guess the physical things, but the way that we actually think and perceive things and want things to be. And I think at the moment, one of the things that we find very frustrating is that you do have this situation where people will go out expecting whatever it is to be paranormal, but they don't investigate the A to Z. They go, you know, the process.
They only go like with that crappy old camera, black and white, where the night vision is even more terrible, and then scream, "Oh my God, what was that?" You know, and then it stops. And I think people, when you investigate in paranormal realms or sites and events, you should make that extra step and go into, even though it's a bit dull sometimes, but step into the science and mix the things so that you can find a clear answer for that what you are seeing or experiencing. And I think that 7 out of the 10 times you can come up with a rational explanation for that what you were seeing, and the other 3, well, probably half of that is unexplainable.
Yeah. You know what though, a lot of our clients are relieved when we when we can actually explain that it's rational. A lot of them are relieved because obviously they're living in fear. You know, that they're actually living in fear that their own house is haunted, and unfortunately they tend to contact other groups at the same time they contact us, and these other groups don't really have an ethical code. You know, they can straight away say you've got a demon. You know, and obviously these clients can have children living in the household, you know, and they think nothing about scaring the household, and they're thinking, oh my God, there's something really bad here. You know, it's evil. It's good.
You get tension. You are building tension on tension on tension, and that is only terrible for, especially for young children. They get nightmares and all kind of things that shouldn't be.
So I think part of our process is to try and allay the fears of people that get into this sort of mindset that whatever is happening around them, even if it's unexplained, things perhaps moving, they may see things actually moving. It needn't necessarily be a demon or something which is totally different. It's frightening.
It's like with all the people in the world, you've got so many different cultures and nations, and somebody speaks German, the other speaks English or African, and everybody is communicating in their own manner as they have been brought up with. So, and I think that it is possible that when you are looking to different realms, that those who are living in another dimension that we cannot see are communicating in a complete different manner. So yeah, pushing things around or moving a chair or knocking on a door, it's just their way of communicating.
Yeah, but it's the fear of the unknown, certainly from our.
Yeah, probably, yes. With most people, I think, yeah.
This is what happens.
So basically, we, with ASAP, member of, we did some training, and the training's very good. It's for investigators. You learn how to witness. You learn how to interview witnesses. You learn how to conduct a preliminary investigation. You learn how to form a hypothesis. You learn how to then do your experiments and then re-look at what evidence you've got, and you're led by the evidence, basically. And the idea behind it is that what we do is ethical. So we're all on a register of professional investigators, and it means that we've been DBS checked. DBS is basically a criminal check to make sure that you've got no convictions. That could be working with vulnerable adults or children, basically. So we go in from an ethical point of view. We don't talk to children. We don't interview children. We don't want to give them nightmares. No. And also we have a consent form that basically allows the client or ourselves to basically withdraw from the investigation at any time if that's what is required. You're not going to be able to read that, but it's a consent form anyway. And then we collect data as well. We have questionnaires, so we log the activity. We look at what's happening, when it's happening, who's present, what's the story of the accommodation, what's the history of it, and we've just got a lot of forms that we do fill in because we try to keep it as professional as possible and collect the information that we need.
I mean, I think the thing is that we wouldn't share that information. It is strictly private and confidential. Yeah. But I think the point is, form filling can be, a double-edged sword. It could be good and it could be bad. But the idea is to maintain some sort of focus and make sure we're getting the information from people which is relevant. Mm-hmm. And obviously, from our point of view, it is there for future records, that we can use. I mean, we obviously won't share that information, but we can use it.
No, of course not.
But it is interesting to see how, different people actually investigate matters. I think I mentioned perhaps in the earlier podcast about how we did one investigation where we'd stayed over. The people in the apartment had been sort of scared. They'd been in touch with, I think it was, I have to say this, who did a remote investigation of the property. They didn't actually attend the property, but they told them that they'd cleared it of demons, which is pretty scary stuff, for people who hadn't even been there. And that's the sort of thing that we don't want to be involved with, and we try and move people away from it and just say, please, ignore it, let's investigate it ourselves. We can't always find the explanations you might want, but there could be some rational explanation as to what's actually happened. And I think in that particular case, we found one area.
It's like a police officer conducting an investigation on a murder site. You can solve 9 cases, and there's always one cold case. And I guess it's the same with paranormal investigation.
And you know what, Maria? I get just as much satisfaction out of being to show people what the rational cause is. Sometimes, you see people with a picture of a green light on a video camera moving around. Yes. And then, you can sit where they're sitting. You can use the same equipment and work out where the light source is coming from, and then bouncing off different bottles until it goes through a green bottle. And then that wavelength then hits the camera lens. And you get just as much satisfaction out of solving the cases, the mysteries, and I very much approach it like a police investigation. You interview the people separately because you get discrepancies between what is actually happening and how much of it's happening at the time, and then you look at the environment, then you look at what could be causing it, and then you conduct the investigation. And I think it's, as long as you're prepared to follow the evidence, wherever that takes you, then that is the right approach to do, basically. And I think it's no different if you're a chemist or a physicist or anything else in life. You know, you follow the information. You don't try and manipulate the information. You just follow the information that you have.
Yeah.
And try to gather as much as you can, more and new data and information to solve the next puzzle.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the way we would normally conduct an investigation is that we would like to, first of all, we get the inquiry, the introduction from the client maybe, and we will then want to meet them to discuss things and then discuss a strategy and then sort of form a hypothesis on what the approach will be and what we're actually trying to prove. And again,
what are you trying to prove? What is Paranormal Research Investigating UK trying to prove?
Okay, well, basically, we're trying to solve whatever's happening for that person in that environment at that time. Whether that's proven that it's completely natural, that's a good result because it makes them feel relaxed. We would like to have evidence to say, well, actually, this is paranormal, but I've yet to meet anyone who could actually present anything. Say, for example, a ghost on 2 different cameras, an apparition on 2 different cameras in the same room. I mean, that would be unequivocally something that you think, okay, that is unusual. So
that would be a form of proof.
Yes,
that there is something that you cannot explain right in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it, what we do. So we'll give you an example of Tilbury Fort again, because in the first podcast we talked about the Ghost Club investigation.
Yes.
But with PR UK, we got contacted by Tilbury Fort again from the staff, and they reported activity in the shop area of the fort. And what I'll do for the viewers, I'll then show you some of the scenes in the shop so you get an idea what it looks like.
I can see that.
This is Nick standing next to a bookcase in the distance. And so what the staff reported was that a book flew off the shelf and landed quite a distance away from the bookcase. So basically, above the shop there was a chapel, and it was full of wooden floors, wooden benches. And what I'm going to do is just show you the environment. There's an air vent there, and the reason why this is all relevant is because when we form a hypothesis, we have to know what could possibly be causing the phenomena. So they reported activity. So they reported that a book flew off the shelf twice after it was placed back on the shelf. They reported hearing mumbling voices and whistling heard by both staff members as they stood next to the store till, and they heard footsteps above the shop from various members of staff, including both male staff. So this is what they were reporting as anonymous activity. So what we do then is look at what a hypothesis could be, what could be involved. So the book fell off the shelf, could be due to natural causes. So basically, we have to look at how the book was placed, how far it would travel if it fell off the shelf, how far it could naturally travel. The mumbling voices, okay, there's an air vent. We have to test how far sound travels from outside the shop, and how can it enter the room. And then with regards to the footsteps, you got to look at the wooden floorboards and the natural sound of wood contracting early in the morning or late at night, and about the new house effect and how natural materials will make noises. So that was our hypothesis basically when we did the investigation. And it's quite boring. There's no hunting demons. There's no chasing ghouls around. But what's interesting is when we interview the 2 people separately, they both give different accounts about how far the book travelled, and then they give different accounts about how many footsteps they heard. And we could probably eliminate most of it down to natural causes.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing was that, as Andy said, you talk to 2 people, so you certainly want to make sure that you're talking to them separately to see whether there's any correlation in the story. So yes, the book did fall off the shelf, but actually when we tried to just tip it off the shelf, it certainly fell within the parameters that one of them described, and it varied between you know, a meter, I think it was just over a meter, maybe 2 meters from memory. And somebody said, oh, it was more than that. You know, it was.
Well, yeah, that is the person's perspective of where they stand and how scared they were at that moment, and etc. Yeah.
Now there could be things going on, but I think on this circumstances, certainly the movement of the book, when we tried to move it, it certainly fell within the parameters. What's also interesting is that the time of day it happened was just after they'd opened up, and one of the observations that we made, and this is how boring it is. I mean, you think of all these stories about demons. There's this little refrigeration unit next to that bookshelf.
I saw that. Yeah, I was trying to make a comment about it in a funny way. Oh, look, there's also an ice machine there. But
yeah. Well, of course, the point is, one assumes that when it actually happened, which would be November, it's getting cold. So, of course, overnight it's got cold. They're opening the shop up. They're turning the heating up in the shop. The refrigeration unit's going to kick in. The floorboards, you know, there's nothing on the floorboard, so presumably there's a possibility. We weren't able to test it, but I mean, you have to think, well, if the refrigeration unit kicked in that particular unit, it's going to vibrate. And if that book hadn't been, and it was quite upright, you know, it wasn't as though it was in a stack of books and had been pulled out of between, you know, a row of 20 books. It was you could see the way it was actually, you know. I think you can assume that that's a good possibility that the vibration actually caused the unit to vibrate, the floors to vibrate, and it just slipped off the shelf.
Yeah, and basically we tried to replicate voices from outside, but we couldn't do it. So, you know, we have to assume then that whatever they perceived to hear in that room, they're not lying. It's just that we couldn't reproduce the noises from outside.
Yeah.
So again, about memory, about the way the brain works, you know, you got two different people with two different accounts, and you know, with the ASAP training, you get taught by someone who's an ex-police officer, and it's all about the first 48 hours of an incident. Your memory starts to degrade after the first 48 hours of doing something or saying something. Yeah. And the other thing you have to be careful of is when clients talk to each other and the story is so polished that it's identical with each other as well. That can be just as a red flag as well, because they mean they've contaminated each other's story. So I'm afraid that a lot of the investigations is quite, I don't know, what's the word?
Clinical.
Detailed and tedious, because you're trying to be accurate, you know.
And the trouble is that it's a bit double-edged, because the thing is that in one instance you've got to believe, you can't say that the people are embellishing their story. In some ways, yes, there always could be fraudulent claims. I don't know. People do that sort of thing, you know, for a bit of attention. But you've got to be careful not to actually sort of suggest that perhaps the story that you're hearing isn't as it was, or you know, and because otherwise you seem to be doubting people's honesty. And I think that is a very difficult situation. There'll be some people that I think you can almost discount. Again, we have to be very careful, and of course this comes back to the ethical point of view, is that there are a lot of people, you know, that generally have either mental health issues, or alternatively, you know, there is substance abuse. I know this sounds dreadful that we're sort of accusing some people of this, but you do come across it. And, you know, you've got to look at the person's situation. I mean, there was that particular case, do you remember, that we went to, where we got a very odd feeling about the environment. We turned up, we hadn't realised that the woman who'd invited us to a house to investigate a supposed haunting wasn't there, and the neighbours took a complete interest. It could have been just interest, but you couldn't help getting the feeling that there was perhaps something going on in the household, you know, social problems.
Yes.
You know, and in the end, you almost become almost like a social worker. If you're not
you have to be careful that you're not stepping into that area of help.
Absolutely, we are not experts in mental health.
No,
you know, and we won't pretend to be. You know, we'll signpost people to where they need to go, but we won't ever try and. So that questionnaire that you saw earlier on, some of the questions are about, are you on a medication? you know, what type of medication do you use? Because we have to be careful about, you know, people's well-being, and we don't want to mix paranormal investigation with someone's breakdown, you know, if they're unwell, if they stop taking medication. I've just got a quick overview of what we did. We did a spreadsheet where we looked at the environment of paranormal. We looked at 20 investigations. We looked at the environment about, you know, the building, the weather, the space weather, the moon phase, and we put a spreadsheet together to see if there's anything common between what might be happening. And but the bottom line was there wasn't. So I don't know if we want to use it or not.
Yeah. I mean, I think the thing is that it's almost like you're looking at folklore. I know, again, if you're taking a scientific approach, you know, you don't want to be drawn into that. But on the other hand, some folklore does actually sort of have an element of truth to it. I mean, I think the connection with water is an interesting one. The connection with certain types of stone, again, is an interesting one. The moon, you know, and the influence that the moon has. I mean,
people, yes.
In the UK, we know on good authority that there are certain police forces. I don't know whether this is still the case, but certainly in the not too distant past, have actually manned their police stations or made sure that there were more staff on when there was going to be a full moon, because there's more chance of violence.
Yeah, I've heard that in the US is when it's full moon, a lot of criminal acts are committed by means of that. So that natural causes or natural elements or annual happenings are influencing us, and thus probably sometimes let us see things, well, that are pretty natural instead of paranormal.
Yes.
Yeah. It's where the word lunatic comes from. Is the full moon and crime. That's where lunatic comes from.
When you think about it, lunatic. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
But Maria, I mean, we're happy to answer any questions that you might have now about anything at all, anything.
Well, devices. Which kind of devices do you use, and which is the latest device that you have applied to your research?
We follow the guidelines of ASAP. You know, obviously we're very much aligned with them, and we do training for them as well. But their view is basically most of the equipment that's being offered. You know, first of all, it doesn't detect ghosts, and you know, if it's there to actually try and prove a scientific point, make sure you understand how to use it and how to make sure it's calibrated correctly. So, for example, we don't use things like the REM pods or the K2 meters or anything like that, because for a start, we know.
SLS camera? I love that one.
Yeah. But I think
all the stick figures, you know?
We've seen that, and we've also seen the other side, how it doesn't work. It's a bit like the K2 meters. I mean, we were on one investigation, again, with the Ghost Club, and somebody was using one. And because it was a high-profile location, again, actually, that turned out to be English heritage, they were very concerned about, you know, the fixtures and the fittings and everything else that was in there, you know, that people were walking through this particular location. Great historical interest, and people were sort of, oh, you know, the K2 meters going off. As it turned out, it was being triggered by the mobile walkie-talkies that the guys were carrying.
So basically, when it comes to recorders, you want a recorder that's got a high sample rate. You want to keep the same kind of formats. Don't process sounds into another format. You want to have two different types of recorder in the same room. You know, you want to try and triangulate any sound that you think is unusual, so you can locate it. I mean, I can give you an example. Until before, I left a good quality recorder. I think it had 96,000 sample rate. You know, so it was high quality, and I picked up this really strange sigh noise on it, like it was a very heavy sigh, and I couldn't figure out where it came from. And I had a really cheap video camera that I set up. So when we move around, a video camera can watch, and if we knock something or something gets caught on clothing, we know we can work out what's happened. But what happened was this really unusual sigh was picked up on the video camera, and all it was somebody laughing in another room closer to the camera. And that goes to show it doesn't matter how good the equipment is, if that sound wave comes through and bounces off walls, goes through objects, and happens to hit the recorder at a certain angle, it can manipulate the sound. So that's why you need multiple recorders and different types of recorders on the scene.
Well, I think that these electrical devices are sorry, a really good support, because earlier you stated also that the mind is a tricky thing when it comes down when you are excited or feeling electrified tension. You can see things, hear things, smell things, which are provided by a high electrical tension in the brain. So I think personally a good combination, of course, between what you as a person see and experience and what is being recorded by technical devices, that combination could provide a form of information that you can work on as a paranormal investigator.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do have is an EMF meter, which is data logging. So I can plug it into my laptop, and the whole time it's recording the data. So, and that triangulates as well. It works on 3 axes. But what was interesting in the case I think I mentioned in the earlier podcast is that the place that we actually sort of slept over, I did a sort of an EMF sweep. Now I don't use the EMF meter to actually try and detect ghosts. I use it just purely to see where there could be high levels of EMF or electromagnetic field. And what actually happened is that I swept the living area, and as I went around the room, it was very sort of benign. It was no problem at all. I came to the corner, and suddenly it absolutely spiked, and it went through a sort of level that would actually cause possible, as far as I'm aware, and I've only read this, I haven't researched it, but as far as I'm aware, it actually created levels of EMF that would have possibly affected somebody's thinking, disorientated them, mood swings, and
it increases anxiety in some individuals,
which is quite good, because we had that record. You can graph it, you could do all sorts of things with it, but anyway, but when we spoke to the person whose flat it was, and I said, one of the interesting things, we've got this high EMF reading, and it was where the power came into a block of flats, and it just happened to be at the corner, which sort of adjoined the cabinet where all the meters were. He said, well, that's interesting, because that's where my wife will invariably sit when she watches television. How often does she watch television? Every night, practically, as people do. They sit down 7 o'clock and sit through 11 o'clock, whatever the story actually was. So that is a possible cause. I can't say that it was the cause, but there was an interesting correlation.
When somebody is not known with how certain waves and electricity and magnetic fields are working, you can easily, get to a conclusion that it's paranormal. Wait a minute, that's my dog. That's another dog.
So the latest equipment I got was this. It's a 360-degree microphone, so it records all angles basically in the room. And what it does, it enables you to be able to pinpoint the exact location where sound comes from. And the reason why that's important is because often in paranormal noises, it's been reported that you can't pinpoint the location. It seems to come from midair, and it confuses people. So this piece of equipment is useful, and if we had that when we heard the knocking sound in the chamber in Tilbury 4, we could have pinpointed the exact location of that knock. So that's why in the end I've gone out and bought one, because if it ever happens again, then we could pinpoint the noise. And Yeah, yeah.
Well, Nick and Andy, again, like last time, we are almost at the hour. And I really like to thank you for talking with you. It is highly interesting. But do you have any additional advice for those people, for young people, for people, PhDs and students who are trying to research the multiply fields within the paranormal?
I mean, we certainly got a reading list of books. I think Andy's going to produce that, but we do feel that there are certain credible people and respected writers when it comes to perhaps particularly poltergeist activity, which seems to be the big catch-all as far as we're concerned, because there's a lot of unexplained and well documented evidenced information about these sort of occurrences.
Before we recommend these books, before anybody does any of the read them, if they want to get interested in this field, there's certain people who've done really good research and give very good advice, because there's a lot of bad advice out there. We will recommend anyone to read Paracoustics by Steve Parsons and Callum Cooper. This helps you to understand how sound works, how sound waves you can analyze, and how people misinterpret sound waves, and how you can alter sound waves until you think you hear something. So that's very good advice about you know, investigating anomalous sounds. Ghostology is by Steve Parsons. This is again, he goes through the whole spectrum of equipment, how people do investigations wrong, all the TV nonsense out there about, you know, dramatizing investigations. It's a very good read, easy to read. The other book we would recommend is Poltergeists by Alan Gould and A.D. Cornell. Now, they studied 500 cases of poltergeists, a lot of them before 1900s, and they categorized every activity, every pattern that was found, every commonality that was found between all 500 cases. And it's a really good read because you get a good overview about the phenomena. So I would recommend that book to anyone. It's probably the best book on poltergeists out there.
It generally is. I think coming back to Steve Parsons, who's very much a leading light at the moment, I think that's one of his best reading. And Alan Murdy at the Ghost Club. Highly recommended.
And if you want a more recent book on poltergeists, this guy here, John Fraser, he's a member of the Ghost Club and the SPR. He's basically looked
looks creepy.
Yeah. So this is like the more modern research that's been done out there. He investigated the cage, which is quite a what's the word?
Active.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Active.
So basically, so that's a more recent read. It's recommend. Telephone Calls from the Dead, Callum Cooper again. This is interesting because, you know, this is about people reportedly, as it sounds, you know, have the telephone call from someone who's actually passed away. And it's a really good read.
Yes. I mean, he picked up on data that was collected by a couple of Americans and sort of thought it was time to recycle it, I guess. But he's actually a parapsychologist. So, of course, that's the new thing. You know, parapsychology is really a different name, I guess, for research into the paranormal. But he's now a PhD. So,
and then the other book we would recommend is the Guidance Notes for Investigators. Only costs £10. You can get this from the SPR website. So this tells you how an investigation should be done. You know, it tells you the procedure and how to conduct yourself professionally and to interpret the data professionally. So these are the books we recommend anyone who wants to enter the field of the paranormal and do their own research and do their own investigations.
That's fantastic.
Those books. And if you want to join the SPR, you can. It's you know, it's a bit more expensive. It's about £60, I think, to join. It's more of an academic society, and they mainly concentrate on psi phenomena, isn't it? Really?
Yes. Oh, yes.
It's telepathy and psi.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah.
So you know, I would recommend. you don't have to live in the UK to join these organisations. You know, if you want a good,
you can do that from all over the world. Just a phone call or via the website, and well, pay your contribution, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Nick, Andy. Before we close out, you already mentioned in our last podcast, but can you mention that again? Where can we find paranormal research investigating UK? Can people ask questions, and where can they do that?
Yeah, the website has got a contact form, so that'll send off or fire off an email. We're also Facebook. We're not prolific social media animals, believers, but you could again contact us through Facebook, leave messages, and people do. But as I say, we'd like to hear from people, certainly their experiences. If they require more information about what we're doing and perhaps some of the societies that we belong to and our methods, we would love to hear from them, really.
Yeah, I mean, we get sent interesting pictures and sounds, and we give feedback. They ask us what they think it is, and we give out honest feedback. And we're quite happy to receive people's queries. Our website's the best place, really.
Yeah.
Thank you all for tuning in this week on The Next Truth, where science and myth meet. Make sure to visit our website, www.nexttruth.com. That is nexttruth, all in one word.com. And let us know what you think about our podcast. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we would appreciate a rating on our website in the section The Next Truth Podcasts. Or if you would simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us too. I am Maria Anna van Driel with The Next Truth. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.